Cool.
All right, I think we can
Okay,
start.
perfect. Shall we start?
How were the experiment last night or yesterday? You managed to get something interesting out of it? See? Some positives, positive faces, maybe. Let's see. So who goes first? Do we have an order?
Well, we can go with the same order of yesterday. So it was,
I think Adam left a message in the chat, if you see, that if you can do it a bit later.
It might be a good time to do it now because we're just going through core research, like clusters, and mine's just been, so it might be a good time if I go through my stuff now, if that's okay.
Okay, that's perfect. Let's do that.
Okay. Ooh, so it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay. Yeah, now you should be able to share.
Yep. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Why is it not going large? Yeah, so it was just developing some parts or like combining some images and looking at some site analysis again as well, and reflecting on the process of how the GAN merged the images as well, and the sort of what processes or areas were generated out of it. So I've started running a new training on a different area as well. So this is the first area that we showed yesterday and went through that. And then this was sort of thinking about just some really basic site analysis of pollution, the main congestion of road areas, and sort of the gradient of air pollution that's generated from them, taken from a website. I'm also interested in sort of the main axis of public transport areas like rail networks, and maybe if they can be maintained, and blue and green infrastructure as well, like the canal network. And then the sort of yellow nodes are like a really rough sort of 5-minute walk in distance proximity. And if they could be used as nodes for the slime mold to search areas, if you were to generate your own slime mold, and if that could be done digitally or in an analog experiment as well. So I forgot I couldn't find the reference for the images, but it was just providing annotations on the slime mold network of what attributes could be associated to the urban infrastructure, and then the potential of these sort of branching searching areas and the dense parts of what they could be used for if it was continually form finding as the context changed or program changed in the context. And the dense parts of what they could be used for if it was continually form finding as the context changed or program. Is there a bit of an echo? Parts of what they could be used for if it was continually. So then these are sort of the comparisons of the epochs with the later generations, and it was a distributed sort of part of spaces, and this was the combined image after we looked at 100 epochs and then went into the 200 epoch, and it was generally just it sort of overlaid more green, like as a higher contrast. It was interested in sort of, I'd like to overlay the slime mold image on top of this and existing infrastructures and the sort of new network infrastructures and the sort of the spaces that were created. So just with annotations in the sort of the negative areas of slime mold, it seemed to create more sort of greener and sort of urban oases. And then on the sort of the branching searching areas or the denser areas of the established slime mold, it used the built or existing built sort of patterns and structures and put them in the more positive spaces, which was quite interesting. I thought it'd be the other way around because they're more permanent really for something that is a searching process. That was just combining the fake slime mold image. So I want to sort of start combining two images in the next stage and sort of do a bit of a merger in Photoshop to see if you can combine existing with speculative stuff as like a way to not be purely speculative, but as a way to maybe bring it to nearer future as a way of how to organise unused spaces within Manchester and maintain existing infrastructure. So I wanted to carry out a second site analysis with the GAN and used spider networks. I want to start a look into why spiders generate certain web patterns and how that can also be understood. And then I'm just running the training for that as well. And that's sort of where I'm up to. So the training's still ongoing to sort of carry out the next stage of that. And then I want to, for Thursday, combine things and just look at it from like a sort of a top-down or a merging of top-down and bottom-up processes.
Can you, thanks. Can you clarify what you are, in terms of brief, which kind of effect would have the slime mold in terms of redesign on Manchester, and which kind of effect you're thinking the silk macro picture will have? So what do they work as analog for? This was not very clear to me, so.
The analog, or in terms of an analog?
Yeah, which kind of infrastructure they are. So slime mold will be mainly associated with transportation in your case?
Yeah, then that's what I'm interested in. It's sort of a need to start looking at sort of associations that can be made between the sort of variable densities within a spider network and how that can be attributed to aspects of an urban sort of system.
But which type of system? Because if it's, for example, a railway station, maybe it's difficult to translate. If it's, I don't know, drone moving, maybe it's more possible to create a correlation. So I was trying to understand which type of element or which type of configuration of a city you had in mind, and how these could work as an analog. So
yeah, so with slime mold, it's obviously like more transport infrastructures of what's been done. Like they've obviously represented like Tokyo's rail network and sort of those optimized routes. I think with the sort of spider sort of network.
And do you agree with the type of representation?
Sorry?
Do you agree with the type of representation or with the type of interpretation of the slime mold? Because some of the paper you're referring to are, I mean, the research in Tokyo started in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So I think, and also was research not done by designer, but by computer science.
Yeah.
So although it looks like he's talking about a city, in reality, he's talking about how the slime mold could effectively be acting as a computer.
Yeah.
So, and it was early stages of material computation and embedded intelligence. So the research that went on both in the group in Tokyo and that later in the group in England with the work of Adamansky, then it's more about using city as a test bed to demonstrate property of the slime mold. But here we are in a different paradigm. We don't want to demonstrate the property of the slime mold that this guy has already demonstrated. In this particular workshop, we actually correlated the idea of material property to the one of machine learning. And we would like to understand how this becomes relevant for a city. So which model of city are we looking at, and which kind of characteristic of the city we want to change or we want to approach? Because I understand in the specific case of Tokyo, in my opinion, the was exactly used to demonstrate how the slime mold could compute efficient network that engineering took years to compute, while the slime mold, although it's a slow computation, will take 2 weeks. But in terms of city transportation, maybe train are not the future, or maybe they are, but I'm not sure they are. So if from an architectural point of view, we remain with the vision of a city in which we deploy slime mold to recompute the rail network, maybe in terms of design, we are not doing a step forward, right? So I think in order to use this tool in an appropriate manner, we should also have the appropriate design question or research brief. That's why I was saying, which kind of transportation system are we applying this to? Because potentially the slime mold and this type of tool can answer more, because they talk about collective intelligence, redistributed system, which is something that train at the moment can't achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they could achieve through some control, they control the train, but they don't. No, they don't. Okay, so which other system could possibly trigger more self-organization when we talk about city movement, right? And so we need, prior to asking a computational question, we always need to have a brief, which is sophisticated enough in terms of design. So this is very important, in my opinion, in using this tool. Otherwise, we borrow a tool from computer scientists, but then we don't innovate in design. If we have a strong brief, then the application of this tool becomes really powerful, because they are unconventional tools that allow, in fact, to discuss and draw in a different manner we have done before. And drawing is also a way to developing a language. And therefore, if the train structure that we have now is drawn in a certain manner, and comes also from the drawing technique that the people that have been designing it had. So if we have other tools, we can potentially open up new brief, but it's a feedback loop there. So we need to, in short, we need to do some research, or maybe you have some research as well. I would suggest, as the workshop is short, to come with your own bit of research on brief of what could be the future of the city, and then apply to this technique to this, okay? Otherwise, we can comment on the technique, but then it's not organically integrated in design. Marco wants to say something.
I think that, let's say, from my perspective, in other words, the value of these kind of experiments are to basically do a little bit the opposite of what computer scientists in the 80s would do, like as Claudia is mentioning. So, rather than using the city as it is, as a platform to test the abilities of these organisms, we would use the ability of these organisms to imagine a city that it could be, but it's not now, or maybe it will never be. But at the same time, it's thinking and visualizing it. It helps us to open up the space of possible solutions. So in that sense, I think that the image that you have generated at the beginning in itself is already a first step. It's quite interesting, and I also looking forward to see this second one, in a sense that it's not really necessarily about providing immediately plausible solution, but rather in terms of creating a possible setting for these new ideas or new applications in, for instance, I don't know, Claudia was mentioning autonomous vehicles or drones, or other form of transportations that may in fact solve issues like pollution or similar problems in cities and congestion, etc., etc. So essentially, it's about creating a scenario where these possibilities are open to occur, I think. I would like to go back 1 second to your first few slides. I don't know if you can just go back.
Keep going.
One more. More. Sorry, but I need to push you back. Yeah, exactly. This one is interesting. Here you started to do some analysis of the context, but the way you have drawn this, it's unlikely to become useful as an input for the GAN, no?
Yeah.
Because it's just way too confusing in terms of the multiple, signs and so on. So I think you need to decide what is that, it's more important to you in terms of driving this experiment, and make a drawing, a representation of it that can be sharp and clear enough to basically be used as an input for the gun. That's ultimately the kind of exercise you are doing. Of course, now you are using fibrous systems, slime mold fibrous systems as input. So one possibility would be to use this kind of representation, but draw it in a way that becomes like a path system, a collection of paths. And so that would be one way to make this then useful as an input, maybe as a substitute of one of the images that you are now using for the biological reference, but something that is more related to your side. The other option could be to try something altogether different. So like you mentioned, or I can see here a kind of representation of pollution as a gradient field. You could actually make this representation a lot denser, so that essentially you create an image that is a gradient, and that we can use as another possible way to manipulate, let's say, the city satellite. No, so I think maybe on this image, I think the challenge should be for you to choose whether you want to try to draw a series of paths that is very dense or dense enough to become an input. No, so in that sense, it would be using something like shortest walk in Grasshopper. I don't know if you're familiar with these sort of techniques, but you could easily use these points that you have defined as a starting point, and then create a network from the lines that you have, maybe from the urban road system, and then create a bunch of paths and use them as input. No, the other option, which is probably easier and quicker, is to basically just push this gradient field description of the pollution in a way that you have a lot more contours, and then you give the contours a thickness so that they become really a denser gradient. No, in that sense, you can create an image that possibly can be used as an input. No, so this could be interesting to begin to have something that is more related to the morphology of your site to enter the experiment. No, then if you move on a little further in your presentation, yeah, that is fine. Exactly. So here you start running these two set of images. It looks to me that I really like that you created this catalog. I think it's very useful. It's not very clear though. It seems to me that you have swapped the columns in some kind of weird way. It would be,
they were just all vertical, so you could see development per epoch, so it just runs horizontally.
Yeah, the horizontal is are the epochs, right?
Yeah.
So can you just tell me which epochs is which, because I can't really read it.
So the middle two are the fake epochs.
Okay, so you are 10, 67.
Yeah.
So how comes you choose these numbers?
I just manually went through, quickly flicked through the image that were generated, and these are just subjectively the more interested images that I came across.
Okay. And did you try also to select like regular intervals? I don't know, like every 5 or every 10?
Yeah, I did that on a previous sort of the other day. I could make a new slide of like regular intervals as well though.
Well, I think both could be good, no? Because on one side, the regular intervals, they allow you to get a sense of how the let's say simulation is progressing, especially if you look at the loss function, how it's moving, if it's actually getting stable, and what is that, how does that reflect on the image? That gives you a kind of indication of how the simulation is progressing, if it's actually converging to something or if it's not working very well. The other thing is the subjective peaking, like you have done. It's also interesting because that, it's about you looking at the specific tiles that maybe show qualities that you find interesting. So that's also a valid method. I think probably both of them, you could create 2 pages. But on the other hand, there are the columns. So you have a real slime all day, real context B, then fake slime all day, fake context B, and then you have the identity slime all day, identity context B, and then you have the reconstruction slime all day, and the reconstruction context B, I suppose, right? So you kind of have alternated A and B, A and B. Okay, fine. Like, yeah, normally they are kind of divided because essentially let's say you have the real one, no? And then you have the fake, reconstruction, and identity that are like the 3 evaluation mechanisms for the one part of the cycle, no? And then you have the other 3 evaluation mechanisms for the other part of the cycle, no? Because cycle gun goes in both directions, no? It does the same generation and evaluation both from A to B and from B to A, right? So kind of alternating them like this, it's a little bit confusing to me. But at the same time, I understand that you kind of gave them an order, and that's fine. And did you notice anything in this progression, or did you notice, for instance, a clear improvement at some point in the actually quality of the fake one, and in the realism of the identity one, for instance?
It quickly improved after sort of 10 to 20 generations or epochs, and then the incremental improvement became a lot subtler in certain senses. If I went back through them all, it'd be interesting to see how it handled maybe more granular features on an urban scale, like how did it handle the buildings compared to more defined boundaries, which it probably did a lot better. Yeah.
And then there is the other question of, for instance, there is the relationship between the resolution of the 2 images. No, for instance, that is also quite interesting, because obviously you can see that it's beginning to associate kind of roads and in some cases buildings with the kind of main branches of the slime mold. No. But then in some other parts also created a association with the green patches. All the green patches normally they tend to relate to the darker part, no? Where there is a kind of a contrast. This is can you move on to the next? Go down to the other generations.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the way he's recognizing the features, it seems that it's working quite well. Now, if you look at the final complete image, yeah, there is this part where this part that it came out rather fuzzy. This is after 200, or it's before?
This is the end of 200 epochs.
Okay. And how was it before? Let's say, do you have also an intermediate image?
Yeah. It seemed to just sort of increase the contrast on the green spaces, mainly.
Yeah, it's kind of maintaining the associations, but it's kind of increasing the contrast on the green part. Yeah, there is this part. I mean, all the image has a pretty good, let's say, resolution and detail, except this part, which is probably where the slime mold is very yellow, no? Where there is very little kind of a contrast or detail in the slime mold, I think. And then you get these kind of fuzzy elements, which is quite common in this kind of a quick experiment. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's working pretty well. Now, I think it would be interesting to see the second one, how it comes out from the generations, the epochs you have done up until now. Did you notice anything?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
In the new simulations you are doing, did you notice anything particular in the epochs that you have created up until now?
Again, it was sort of the contrast, or it was put in on the areas of high contrast again. So where the web is maintaining sort of paths or built structures, whereas in the darker areas, that's where green infrastructure or green spaces are placed again.
But it's pretty sharp, no?
Yeah, it's interesting. And then also where sort of waterways and that are placed there in sort of the bigger open areas on the spider webs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I can see there like this really fine network of little paths. That is really interesting. And again, I think what Claudia was mentioning before, I think the trick now is also for you to kind of pick up some of these speculative elements and, you know, just use the image to trigger your imagination, but maybe also to drive your research, you know, in a direction of what are the modes or the models, you know, of urban development and transport, depending on the topic. If the topic is transport in your case, that, you know, would suit or would, you know, operate in such a scenario, in such a context, no? So it becomes a kind of a almost like a reverse engineering, you know, of what kind of systems may work there. And I think in that sense, it's an interesting way of kind of using this speculative engine to, you know, to kind of push forward, you know, your take on these problems, on these topics. But yeah, no, I think for me it's going really well. I don't know if Irini has something to add from the point of view of the simulation, etc. But in general.
Yeah, I think he has already ended up in some conclusions. So now what you suggested to do some experiments on the real city and on the real satellite, following the network of the city. So we can see something also more realistic now from this side. So yeah, it would be interesting to experiment that too.
Yeah, I think Claudia yesterday, no, was showing this little model, no, and
maybe if I show it.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, you from your urban diagram, you could draw something like that to basically reach a similar texture as this image you're using from the spider, but with the morphology actually following your keynotes on the city. So, you know, obviously it's a kind of a quite short workshop, so maybe you have to rely on your skills in terms of drawing these fibers and so on. But, you know, I think that, you know, whatever technique you feel comfortable with, it could be nice to try to draw an image that, let's say, has similar qualities than this spider web one, or even slime mold as such, but you know, using this point as the kind of a key driver. So then you can bring that, let's say, a little bit closer connection with the real city. Finally, there is something that I would like to say on the graphic. I mean, I like that you are annotating things, but I also very much like to have clean images on the pages, especially when you are trying to uncover this pattern or to observe this pattern. So maybe you could find a way to lay out your presentation so that you have one page in which the image is like nice and clean, and then you go to the next slide and you have your annotation on it, and so that we always get to see the clean image in one page. And yeah, I mean that's like a general comment probably for everyone, but since we are working with a quite fine detail and we are actually trying to uncover these little patterns, etc., it's good to be able to see them like really big and clean, and then move. Obviously, if we want to make a pull things out, annotate, we can do. One thing you can do if you want to make an annotation could be also to basically circle the area where these things happen, and then in the following page kind of blow it up so that we can actually see it even better. So you could make a catalog of parts of the bigger image that you find intriguing, and kind of represent them in the following pages, kind of blown up, almost like you're looking them with a lens, right? Because again, one of the limitations of using zoom and these kind of techniques is that also we're not like we are working in pretty low res, which for this kind of drawings and images it's okay, but sometimes it's harder to spot certain details on a little screen. So it's always important to keep pages simple, and then when you want to annotate something, kind of blow it up, one per page, just very simple layout, so it's kind of easier to read.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, great work. I mean, I hope you are enjoying it as well, but it looks like it's going pretty well.
No, it's really interesting. It's good to sort of use it as a speculative sort of tool, and then also, as you say, reverse engineer it. So it's like looking at some Dun and Bradstreet stuff on like speculative everything on how they might look at modes of transport and things as well, and how that can sort of facilitate new distributed networks or less polluting sort of systems and things as well.
Because that's one of the big problem, I think this, I'm talking again generally, but if you look at when you talk about smart cities, when you talk about, all this kind of IoT innovation in urban design, I mean, there is just so much stuff going on, but it's always projected onto the city as we know it. Now, if you, pretty much all the kind of innovation in terms of, autonomous vehicles, drone technology, smart city technology, IoT, all this kind of stuff is applied on the city as we know it. And I think that is problematic, because actually it kind of locks in these solutions into what they can offer, right? I mean, like essentially they are almost like forced to operate within a system that is being shaped by machine age technology, not. So I think to a certain extent, I feel like the role of designers and urban planners as we are is to obviously understand, engage with these kind of new technologies like, artificial intelligence and other stuff, but, try to create the conditions for it to basically kind of unpack, the opportunities that there may be, like to really create a speculative scenario whereby the space of possibilities and of possible solutions is much wider, no? Because it's not locked into one specific channel. And so so I think that's pretty much the way I kind of see the value also of this, like just providing a vision of a city whereby people can really release and unleash the potential of some of these solutions, and then perhaps engineer back how we may be getting there, in a way that works. But
no, it's really interesting to sort of challenge the status quo, how things have just progressed for so many years.
Anyway, cheers, thanks.
Thank you.
So next one is Corvinian.
Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
morning.
So this was my progress until yesterday, where I tried to assemble my water flowers with the city pattern. And the result was not really satisfying at all. Like when you look really close, there's some similarities where the street network corresponds to the root network of the water flowers. And this is the opposite result, where I applied the satellite image onto the water flowers, and this is what I got out. Also, there's some similarities, like here, this rock and this rock here, making a pond right here, or the green area is mostly the dark areas in there. But like you, Marco, already said, I think the resolution of the satellite image, it's too large. So it's like every pixel has another information in it. So before retraining the model, I just tried to use the already trained model from the flowers to apply on a smaller plot. And this is what came out in the one direction. It's mostly just overlaying the pattern of the flowers onto the satellite image. So it's not really changing the topography or the city arrangement in any way. So I trained it in a little bit smaller scale, and I picked a completely different site for the satellite image, since it doesn't really matter at all. And in this area, I found a nicer quality of the satellite image. It's not as flat as over Kathmandu, because in the end, I figured that when the contrast and the colors of the satellite image are better, then the gun knows better what to do, I think, and the results get better. So these are some steps of the training. It's not no specific screenshots. It's just when I was at the PC and I saw some results. I wasn't sitting in front of it the whole time. And this was the end result. And I was actually quite happy with it, because now it's picking up the single buildings and the morphology of the landscape, of the erosion and everything. Here are some zoom ins on these areas. And as a next step, I wanted to go in even a little further, where it becomes more clear how the street networks are behaving and how the forest networks and the agriculture is behaving. So I think it was important that I picked areas from the satellite image that has all the components that I need in the end. So I picked this one where I have a river and I have the buildings and I have agriculture and I have forests, like the 4 main points that I needed.
Hi. Sorry. Can I ask something? Was this
Sure.
Kathmandu, or you choose another city?
The erosion right here is from Kathmandu, and the satellite image is from somewhere in Europe, like where I found. I also picked this spot because the color of the satellite image was quite nice and the outcome became much nicer.
Okay.
But
let's see,
like this is the topography.
How it goes. I was thinking you were going to apply the erosion to Kathmandu. I mean, as a process, it seems more coherent. But let's see until the end, and then we comment. Thanks, clear.
The erosion is from Kathmandu. It's just the satellite image that's from somewhere.
I understood that, but I thought you would pair the erosion of Kathmandu with Kathmandu. But it's okay. Go one step at a time, and then we'll understand better. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's actually about it. I just had some thoughts that I could maybe do it in 2 steps to apply the flow lines or some kind of pattern to train it on the erosion, and afterwards train the outcome with the satellite image again. So it's going in 2 steps. I'm not quite sure what's going to come out, but it could be interesting, I think.
Thank you, Corbinian. So, well, okay, go back 1 second. I think like the success is definitely, if you go back, yeah, I think this image seems to be working quite well, no? So in a way, I think you found a scale, no, or a resolution in which let's say the erosion pattern and the satellite are working together quite well, no? So it seems like also when you zoom in the detail, it's really good. There are not many fuzzy areas, etc. No, maybe a little bit where the contours, where the flow lines have these kind of gray, slightly grayish areas. But maybe you could also even Photoshop slightly the image of the erosion. So that it gets a little bit more of a gradient-like quality or contrast in these areas that are a bit flat, or maybe even render it a little bit better so that it does not so flat. Maybe there are a bit more of a material reflections, like if you would give a material that is a bit more reflective, the gray part will not be so flat. Or you could also render it with some color gradient. But I think you can work very well with this erosional image, and it works well. Now, for me, it's just a matter of applying it in the correct area, like in the actual equivalent patch in Kathmandu. I understand that you are saying, oh, the color in the Alps, whatever you are here, are nice, so I get a nice image. But at the same time, you know, I think you can get a nice image in Kathmandu as well if you try at the right resolution. I think the satellite in Kathmandu is also pretty decent, especially some part of the city have a quite decent resolution themselves. I think we were checking that yesterday. I think it was I think it's enough. So in my mind, you are getting there. You're getting close to find the right combination. I think you just need to try it and test it on your project. Can you also go back one more?
To the epochs?
One more. Yeah, then we come back to this. One more. Back. Yeah, I mean, do you have the reverse of this?
I didn't run the reverse yet, no.
I suppose they should be running all together, no?
Yeah, I just have to combine it, like.
Okay. No, because I was thinking that what we normally are looking for is the modified satellite, not so much the let's say flower one, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it would be interesting to see the reverse. But in any case, I personally feel that the erosion patterns are much more interesting than this flower one, this flower image for the sake of this experiment, especially since you have a very good control on them. So I would stick to them. Maybe, as I said, you could render it a bit better so that it's not so flat gray, but has more material quality to it, a bit more shininess, create some gradient of reflections, no? But look, this image of Kathmandu, no, this is Kathmandu, right?
This is Kathmandu as well,
yeah,
yes.
It's pretty good resolution, no?
Yeah, but I was just thinking, like, the resolution is good, but it also just has the components. It has buildings, and it has a forest, and it has agriculture. So I thought it doesn't really matter if it's European buildings or Kathmandu buildings,
No,
or
but
if it's
no, I
and
understand.
it's
But what
applied
is
on the
interesting,
erosion.
what is interesting is that the erosion match the satellite. No, so actually what we have is a result that is let's say more realistic in terms of that territory. So in other words,
in terms of transformation. So it's okay to completely, as we discussed also with Paula yesterday, it's okay to completely transform a territory as a first test. But ideally, in the long run, what you should do is to try to apply simulation that are from the same territory to the satellite map, so that the training happen with either simulation that can be digital or physical, like the one we've done with the slime mold, that has relationship with the territory. So the simulation from abstract start to materially transform the territory. And ideally later we can discuss also how these can acquire three-dimensionality and more information. But the fact is that information of abstract map and simulation related to the territory, how can they transform the view from the satellite that we have of the territory itself? Mm-hmm. That is, for me, a more interesting question than how simulation transform a random territory, which is okay, but this is
test the tool.
To test the tool is perfectly okay. So it's good you understood about resolution and how to inform the tool, but in terms of project is also what we discussed with Adam before. What is interesting is when there is an interesting brief question, not when we just apply the tool. So in terms of project, it becomes more interesting when also there are correlation between the drawing and the algorithm to start to read this correlation. So it doesn't completely transform what exists, but modify it. Mm-hmm. Eventually, it's even better if we can achieve a level of control where we have modification that happen gradually, and we can control the speed of this modification and the intensity and the pattern and etc. But if the simulation is run on Kathmandu and you use the same frame of Kathmandu, is actually better because there will be correlation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you will not just simply transform completely the city, but you will apply information that are related to the city that you're being simulated to the city itself. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that the city from the satellite is not the city as we know it, but will change. So there is a design operation there. Okay, mm-hmm. That has got an intention, a simulation, and an algorithm, and a series of process, but there is a design intention. It's not simply misuse, right? Because we don't, we as I tend in my course, I usually don't misuse algorithm. There are people that have a whole method to do that and do it, but I don't. I try to create, a workflow for which we use algorithm and they evolve a conversation with what exists, okay? Mm. If we apply it in a different manner, then we will end up misusing them and disrupt the conversation, but that's not the type of method that we are trying to apply at the moment, okay? Is a different point of view. There might be researchers that do that or people that do that, but I'm personally not so interested on that. I'm more interested on understanding the tool and evolve the way to use it so that can be applied to a specific territory and can be a transformation of the territory. How drastic we can discuss, but we need to develop a control and a technique that allows us to transform an existing territory. Does it make sense? Yeah, Mark, something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to just add one thing, like, let's say from my perspective, as I'm a kind of a quite new, to your work, but I think I saw it once in Innsbruck. And essentially, the way I understand it is that there is this large urban sprawl that has occurred in Kathmandu, which has pretty much erased some of the features of the landscape, in particular affecting the waterways, and the water system quite drastically. with some problematic consequences, no, in terms of contamination of the water and maybe so scarcity of actually good water, etc. No? So my understanding of your erosional simulation was to try to use these digital tools to kind of fast forward a process for, in a way, recreating a landscape that had the capacity to retain, filter the water, no? But let's say when I look at your erosion images, they are very beautiful, but they look like an abstract landscape. They don't look like a city. So in my mind, what this experiment could bring to the conversation is how would let's say a water collecting and filtering city look like in Kathmandu, right? And in that sense, I think that if you are able to run simulations like the one you just ran now in whatever the Alps, that look like really sharp and clean, but where the data sets are corresponding in terms of geography in Kathmandu, then we may be able to get some intriguing visions of this city of Kathmandu reconstructed or evolved on a morphology that effectively works with the process of retaining and filtering water, no? So in that sense, it becomes really a kind of new way of understanding the urban landscape as part of the water cycle or the water process, which in Kathmandu is really critical. So I mean, that's how I read it in terms of the brief. I don't know if that kind of makes sense to you, or you have a different perspective.
I agree, but I'm not sure if I communicated it right, because the topography and the geography of this image on the right, it is from Kathmandu. It's like a 3 by 3 kilometers part of Kathmandu, and it's just a satellite image that's from another location. And as far as I understood the cycle gun, it's just using the information in the satellite image. Like I said, like for example, the houses and the agriculture and the forest, and applies it to my erosion drawing. And it's not using any topography information from the satellite image. It's just using this information from the erosion and kind of converting it to the satellite image.
Sure.
So
it's a style transfer, right?
Yeah.
It's transferring the stylistic qualities of the satellite. But if the satellite is not Kathmandu, the final image will not look like Kathmandu. I mean, although you can say trees and pastures are similar, but no, because actually it's a completely different ecosystem.
Type of ecosystem.
So,
yeah, okay, in this sense, yes. Yeah.
So we understood very well, and
Yeah.
we understand there is some logic into there, but still the Alps are not Kathmandu. So there is a very specific ecology that you can recognize also from the satellite, and there are very specific color of green, shades of green, and
kind of
type
building types,
housing,
materials used.
materials that are typical of the Alps and that are not transferable to Kathmandu. So, so I would be much more specific with the site that you work with than try to use the same crops or crops nearby if you want to do a style transfer of this kind, or try to do the reverse. But I don't know whether there is the simulation that is to inform the site, or you just use the topography and you transfer the information from the site like you did here. But I think you should use either exactly the same site, or if you think that will not work well because will be too correspondent, then and you want to transform it more, then a site that is nearby. So you use information from Kathmandu, not from the Alps, which are pretty far in terms of planet Earth.
Okay, now I think it's clear.
So
it doesn't need to be millimetrically just opposed, because like you said, that doesn't matter, but at the same time it needs to be Kathmandu, otherwise it's something else. And you can see, I mean, like nobody sees that image and say, oh look, it's Kathmandu. No, it doesn't look. And that's because it's a different material And you know, every city has its own.
Kathmandu has got this blue roof that we didn't know what they were. That we
See, they are
noticed
metal.
yesterday. Yeah,
Like
these
sort of
metal
cheap
things.
metal.
Yeah, there are things that you see from the top and you recognize.
Yeah, but it's
more.
beautiful. It's what makes it.
And yeah, in this case, looks still Alps.
All right.
So I mean,
Thank you.
basically, I guess you're you know to try to get to the best quality of your final image, you definitely want to go in Kathmandu and search for the portion of the city that have higher quality. Like normally, like the way you know Google scans things, there are patches that are higher resolution and better, and others that are more compressed, or they are in a cloudy day, whatever. Even the cloudy one could be interesting at some point, you know, if you wanted to create the cloudy version of it. So, you know, like you can experiment with that, but essentially the key is that you find a patch of Kathmandu that is high res and that captures some of the qualities of that landscape and of that city. And then, you know, you see what happens.
Yeah. And the image quality from the satellite images from Kathmandu, they are all fine. It was mostly just the colors, but I just have to Photoshop over
Sure,
it
but at the
because
same
I like
time,
the saturation and everything more
yeah,
here.
you can work with that a little bit. I think there is one part I was checking yesterday. There is one part of the city that it comes out really quite neat and nice, and the colors are very unique of that city, which I think is interesting, and other parts less so. So I mean, it's a question of you finding the best bits, and maybe yeah, if you want to Photoshop them a bit, of course, it's part of the game. But I also like the fact that there are some very peculiar aspects of it. So the last thing I wanted to add was about the epochs. If you could, for this image that worked pretty well, if you can do a more complete catalog of the epochs, that would be good. And maybe also label it so that we know which epoch is which, and what each column is representing. It's kind of useful to organize them in like the 8 columns, and so that horizontally you have all the epochs. I think it kind of allows us to compare better. Then, of course, you can also do the other way around, but I mean, I guess if we keep the same order, it's easier to read. But yeah, I don't know the last one. Yeah, I don't know which epochs are these, but it looks like the second one is already pretty good. So
yeah, it was pretty far in. I think that's like 68, and I think.
Right.
Yeah, they're similar, like, because I was leaving my PC for a while and then coming back, taking some more screenshots, and then it was done already. But I'll do it similar as Adam, that I just pick it out of the folder and throw it together.
Also, the reconstructed image, I think it's a quite interesting indicator. I was looking also a little bit more carefully myself. And the reconstructed image is basically going through 2 cycles of generators, no? And it goes back to the original one. And so it's interesting when it looks like so close to the original one. That means that essentially the transfer is working really well. So I think in this case, it seems like it's pretty good. So I don't see problems there at all. All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paula?
Hello, good morning.
Oh, sorry.
So I started after yesterday's conversation. I started with doing a test with the already trained Coral that I had used, and onto a more zoomed in site, given that I thought that this training, the first one over here, it had just focused on the south part of the satellite image. Although the results, they are quite similar. Just here, it seems like the water is more blended into the site. Although what I was saying, that the results are quite similar. I think it's interesting, the slight contrast with the test run with the more zoomed in site. And then I started analyzing this piece of sponge, I want to call it. It's not really a coral, and I already had these photographs that I had taken in the past, and I started exploring the porosity, the crevices, and sketching it more in depth to see what are the qualities that I think that this specific site that I'm analyzing could benefit from. And then with this one, which I think that definitely these two combined, well, I'm looking forward to see like how those results would come out. I think that they are each like very different, but the qualities that they can bring to the site, they're very specific in terms of breaking that hard edge, starting with South Point Park, which is the park that I had chosen. And well, yeah, this is an analysis of the Florida tract map, reef tract map, which is what's going on underneath. And I think that as I'm using ocean as part of the satellites, it's quite important to know what is going on the bottom. And this is the South Point Park, more zoomed out, and the greens are showing where the ecosystems are currently thriving. These are more reefs that are far from the edge. And I think that with this approach, starting with this site and then maybe focusing on other coastal cities, is seeing where there is an opportunity, especially underwater, to break that edge, given that the sea level is continuously rising. So seeking opportunity on those edges. And this is a past project that I've worked on this site again. I think it's interesting, but that's why I want to keep developing the site and see what else comes up. So this is a structure that I did with Grasshopper, and it's very three-dimensional. It goes from the ocean, from inside the seabed into the land. Although I don't know if you can see in this image, it kind of like stops right there. So it's focused really on the edge. And I think with this next approach, I want to see how this actually merges with the city and maybe with the already existing networks that are there. So I ran a second training, and it's still in a very early stage, but I have used this image, which I am unsure if the scale is appropriate with the scale of my satellite. These are the epochs every 5, again, I said, but it's a quite early stage. And actually, yeah, I took one last, well, actually, I had taken another screenshot right before I started presenting, which I could start seeing how the edge was being manipulated and contrasted with this input image. I think what I'm most interested about is seeing how, basically optimizing and making more efficient the surface area into a more three-dimensional spaces. And I think it's, Marco, you just mentioned something about it, how maybe further we could see something like that. And yeah, I'm curious to see how the difference in heights and volumes and the contrast with both images and what it does to the site with that. So far, this is where I'm at. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. So, oh, sorry, I have a problem, Marco. I think you need to.
All right, maybe I go in the meantime. Yeah. No, thank you for the presentation. So yeah, I mean, this is obviously still running, so it's kind of hard to comment more on it. But it seems like it seems like it's getting more precise already in Epoch 20. The obviously the grain of the image of the coral is really fine. So I hope it can bring details to that scale. I was wondering, like, how are the two original images for this simulation? What is their what is the frame that you chose for them? So this is the city part.
Right, and then this is the image.
Okay.
Yeah, I was maybe still. I think maybe it's not the correct scale to compare it with the site. Maybe I should zoom out a little bit more.
Well, I mean, obviously there is no right or wrong. I think the question is to see whether the level of detail of one can match the level of detail of the other one. No. And normally, if you look at the generations, the epochs, when now that you are getting around maybe 30, 35, you should be able to see already in the small tiles if the detail is working in a sense, if there is enough detail, and also if the resolution of the coral is working. But yeah, I mean, that is something that you only have to see as it goes along, and try to see if it's picking up enough. Like, for instance, this frame here, it looks a bit fuzzy, but that's also difficult to tell if it's working good or not. This one is divided in half. Is it possible? Okay, anyway, let's go back to the presentation. So this is the new attempt you have done with the other image. I cannot see it very well. Maybe you should zoom in more, or it would be good to see the image at more close up. Just move it a little bit on the new one. So what do you think about this? You think the other one it's more sharp, or this one it's better? Actually, now that you zoom in, I think I can see quite a lot of detail.
Yeah, I think this one is better defined, definitely. Maybe it gets lost a bit in the ocean, whereas the other one, in a way, you could see more like the swirls extending onto the page. So
yeah,
I do like the contrast, though. It feels like this one, it's more invaded by the water, in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this seems to be quite successful, especially in this part where it's quite dense. There is quite a lot of resolution. The build part, it's been quite completely redescribed though. No, so it's it looks more like a landscape, no, like a park than a built area, right?
Right.
Or at least that's how I see it from here.
No, yeah, definitely. I feel like the buildings are translating into coral itself. Yeah.
And this, I think, maybe has to do with what we were saying, the question of resolution, no, between the two images. Like, if you go back 1 second to the original image. Thanks. To the piece of city that you took. Yeah, as you can see, the individual buildings are very big, no?
Yeah.
And if you compare their size, let's say with the coral and with the really fine level of detail of the coral, I think that basically the algorithm is combining more, let's say, all these little components that you find on the roof of the buildings, or of the and it's using them to recreate this kind of a city. So in that sense, is quite intriguing, because is taking the morphology of the coral as if it was a kind of a landscape or a cliff, if you want, and then it's taking all the little components that you have here, like the trees, the little pool, the people itself, all the little devices that are populating this part of the city, and is using them to build up the new one. So the buildings themselves are kind of let's say broken down or disintegrated in that in this translation.
Right.
This for me it's interesting, because I don't particularly like these buildings, and I found it quite intriguing that this part of a city is reimagined as a kind of a huge inhabited cliff, or reef. But that's also up to you. If you wanted to see, let's say, the blocks, the building blocks more, let's say, translated into the image, probably you need to find either zoom out a bit on this image, or maybe take a portion of the other one. I'm guessing, because obviously you have to try, but to a certain extent, I think that the scale of the two is such that in this example, the buildings are kind of being reimagined into the cliff.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to zoom out and show more of the city.
It kind of, I mean, the project that what is coming out now, it kind of looks quite similar to the proposal that you made before, in a way, like where the city is now shaped into the form of a reef, and then it's populated, right? And I think that's pretty much what the gun has a sort of done, but perhaps in a more realistic way, because it's using the actual material and components of the city.
Right.
But the solution that is emerging is quite similar, if you want.
Yeah, then I'm gonna see like then how I can tweak a little direction to see what else comes up.
Where is it? What is the part that you are running now in this image?
Right here.
Oh, I see. Is the little tip there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could try also taking a little bit bigger portion of the city. I mean, not as big as the whole thing here, but
yeah,
maybe something where you can, where the buildings could be also understood as individual components.
I was thinking maybe taking an approach also on the bridges and everything that connects, let's say, the island to downtown. To think about like what happens with this infrastructure when it can no longer be used.
There is this part down here. What is the area at the bottom in the middle?
Right here.
Is it like a landfill?
Oh, this is sorry, no. This is the cruises terminal.
Is it like an industrial area, that one?
It
or-
is. Yeah, it is an industrial area. Definitely.
Zoom in. Can you zoom in a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that looks like some kind of yeah, industrial complex.
Hmm.
Maybe
And right
connected
above
to
here
port.
is the port and the cruise terminal.
Yeah. And the project that you did, where was it?
Where was it? Also
Yeah.
here in the
Ah,
same
okay.
site.
So that
yeah.
that is already where you are.
Yeah.
I don't know, Claudia, you want to
Yeah.
add something?
I just wanted to add something in terms of brief. I think it will be good for all by Thursday to have not a long set of diagram and presentation about previous project, but like a short sentence at the beginning and the title that state how you're thinking to apply this technique and which kind of innovation you think it could bring. Can you remind me again, how do you see the coral model contributed to the redescription of the coastline here?
Okay.
Because it is quite common, right, to use coral in, let's say, almost biomimetic term as a model to redescribe coastline, especially when there are problems of flooding or erosion, like there might be in your site. But what is your specific interest and what we want to discover through this exploration?
So reimagining the edge, looking into different species that have different qualities. For example, this one, which is not essentially coral, but it's part of the ecosystem, and the sponge quality of it, it allows for nutrients to be stored to optimize the environment for the seagrass and mangrove growth, for example, which is what helps and cleans the levels, the pH of the water for corals to grow there. And then also making that part of the city and almost like taking over it slowly as the sea level is rising, and allowing people to interact with these things and learn and basically like participate in this restoration. So that's kind of.
Can we be more specific on that? Maybe one way could be even to quantify this. So if you look at your result image from the color pigment, the one from the gun, can we quantify the presence of human and non-human species in habitation from maybe the color gradient quantity? Can we start to become more specific on, I don't know, what are elements that are, and which kind of species do you mean? Are photosynthetic species, are not photosynthetic, are calcareous species? Which kind of contribution do they give? And how do we, once we have run the gun, recognize them morphologically, but also maybe in terms of color pigment, so that we can start to associate a new type of programmatic description by reading this post-satellite image, okay? Because what we attain is a modified satellite image. Then to develop a project, we will still need to develop technique and a workflow to make that three-dimensional, to work on it in the detail and etc. But this is a sort of transformed satellite image. So if we want to read it, and satellite usually read through colors, then maybe we can extract color to analyze or and speculate on what we get. So information about human, non-human species, not human, which one, You know, some of the coral might act as a barrier for the water, or might modify the flow of the water so that it channels there and doesn't go on the rest of the city. Some of the water inhabitant might be photosynthetic, like microalgae, or have other property, clean the water like oyster or whatever, right? So
Right.
but which one are we referring to? And which one are we looking at? And how do we evaluate, in this sense, the image that comes out?
Mhm, I
Where
see.
do humans sit and where do the other stays? You know, not that there needs to be a wall, but we're not segregating the environment. We're not zoning, as I said yesterday, but still we need to be specific, because
Yeah.
otherwise we go from zoning to vague.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that makes sense.
not from zoning to distributed. So how do we read and quantify this distribution in this new plan that emerge?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
I really like the way these two images somehow have this feeling of being maybe like 20 or 30 years apart, or maybe even more, no? But they have this, they kind of suggest, no, a sort of time frame. You were saying that one looks like it's more flooded than the other, no? But is not just the flooded. It feels like the kind of let's say grassy parts have been kind of
Grown.
eroded away, no? And they have been you know, kind of basically occupied by pool, which look quite deep. So I don't know. I think there is something also very intriguing about this, seeing these two images next to each other, and I wonder whether there could be a third or a fourth one in the series that you can create that suggests also the idea of how a city that operates at such a tip or edge between land and the water, you know, needs to be understood as a kind of a, you know, evolving piece of infrastructure, which essentially in time will, you know, change quite drastically, no? And how can we imagine and control this change, like what Claudia was mentioning? What kind of material technologies and systems of construction may work in such a dynamic scenario? So in a way, I think that already these two images together in my mind, they are bringing up some really, oh, something happened. They are bringing up some really interesting narratives there. And so I was wondering whether maybe rather than creating a completely different image, maybe one option could also be to try to add, no, to the series almost, no, like see if you know, how far this can evolve in this kind of direction, no, almost to create like a timeline of the project.
Yeah,
And the other thing that could be intriguing, which maybe is quite banal, but I think it's also quite interesting, is if you could take these images and kind of Photoshop them back into the larger frame that you have, to kind of imagine or at least kind of see them a little bit more in the context. No, I know that they are quite. Let's say speculative in their nature, but at the same time, they are not crazy. I mean, they make sense in terms of where they are. And but let's say if we look at them like this, they seem yeah, they are kind of removed from the context of our conversation. Whereas I think now we were looking at the satellite image before, and what strikes me there is that you have what looks like a really high-rise development, and then in the front you have an island that is completely still occupied by you know, kind of marine lagoons and so on, and then you have a part that is totally artificial, and then you have the port, and so there is this coexistence of really distinct type of development, and they somehow all come together into this kind of aquatic system environment. So I wonder how would it look like to have your new invention, let's say your new typology, photoshopped it in, I don't know, in the tip, or you can be quite playful in terms of how do you want to arrange it, because in the end of the day, it doesn't need to be exactly located in the tip where you were before, but I mean, you know how to work with it, and maybe also play with its scale a bit to see at what scale it works better. But I think it could be an interesting experiment to kind of project it back in the real world and see how it fits and what is it creating. No?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's very, I mean, in a way, I think the fact that it's very realistic in its texture, I think it could probably sit in the larger picture quite well, and also begin to generate a whole series of new visions there. So I would be quite intrigued. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really beautiful. Like I kind of I found it really quite exciting, and I think that if you try to do this Photoshop back in, maybe you will even get some more ideas on how you could treat the boundary of this image to fit in. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
The side of the water goes on the side of the water, like you may try to find the right way to locate it to be quite interesting. But if you compare it to your project, I mean, obviously in your project you had you remodeled it all in 3D, etc. Now we are working more at the kind of level of the image. But on the other hand, if you compare it to your project, there is so much more detail here, right?
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting also to kind of maybe use these to reflect back what is that your project can bring to this image in terms of interpreting it, and on the other hand, what is this image bringing to your project in terms of scale, resolution, in terms of like what Claudia was saying, this kind of different programmatic levels and so on. And I think that could be an interesting also exercise to do in terms of giving more quality to this image, or interpreting this image in the light of the research that you did for your project. Surely it's there is a lot of ideas and information that you had there which could be loaded into this. But yeah, no, very good. In terms of your presentation, it would be good if these two images, it's nice to have them side by side, but it would be also nice to have each one kind of zoomed in so that we can actually really explore them and see the detail of them. Because again, unfortunately, we are working at low res in the screen. I wish they were big, printed on a wall, or on a larger screen. But in the end of the day, we have to, But so it would be good if you also make sure that we can all see what's in there, by proposing them at different resolution, maybe zooming in certain parts that you find more successful, and so we can see them better. And
sounds
maybe
good.
This game of the before and after, you could also do it in the more zoomed in parts, and then put them into one slide after the other, and so that when you kind of flick from one slide to the other, we can kind of see the change. It could be quite nice to see the correspondence.
Yeah, we'll definitely work on that. Thank you very much.
Cool,
no, you're welcome. It's really good.
Also, we will try to discuss with Irini later, and maybe share with all the 6 of you template for the presentation on Thursday, so that we can organize the information in a streamlined manner, and they are more compact, and so we can also, it's easier then, we can have a booklet that we can share with you, and we can have correlation with the different project and etc. Cool. We'll see this with Irini, and she will let you know whether we will organize like this, but I think that will be a good idea. Cool. Thank you, Paola.
Thank you.
I think Lasse was next.
Well
Irini,
done.
is that correct? Don't remember.
All right.
Lasse?
Yes.
All right.
Hi. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Just to be sure, can you see my screen? Yes, okay. So I'm just going to start by first synthesizing what I did yesterday. So this was Korgos, which is at the border of between China and Kazakhstan. And I used this image of biochar, an electron microscopic image of biochar, which is used to regenerate soils. So here you can see the different epochs, which are ordered as like fake A, fake B, real A, real B, and then the IDTs and the reconstructed images. And so I can scroll down through them, and I think it's quite nice to see how they evolve. Yes, and so after that I combined the image, and this is what I got. I wasn't completely, or I am not really convinced by the image. I think what the gun did is simply to take the landscape parts of the satellite image and to map them out on the biochar image, and it completely I feel like it couldn't get hold of neither the infrastructure nor the manufacturing landscape, etc. And so after that, I thought about how to approach it further, to go further, and I couldn't find a good idea or good approach for another bioreference. I couldn't. I wasn't sure how to work with that site specific. So I thought I would try to use the site I first intended to use, but didn't, which is a site in Sumatra, Indonesia, and is the largest oil extraction and processing site of Indonesia. And it's quite interesting, located next to this city where most workers work. It's surrounded by forest, where those if we zoom in further, where the field branches out to check for new oil sources, and next to it, all surrounding it, are now palm oil plantations, because it seems like the oil extraction became less and less lucrative, and so the city itself decided to look for an alternative. And so I zoomed into this part of the site, because I thought it kind of it brings together three interesting characteristics: the drilling fields, the forest and the test drilling, and the palm oil plantages, which are which are again, as the first site, in a modernistic way separated from each other, and also show this type of manufacturing landscape actually. So as a second input, I thought it could be interesting to, or I looked at mycorrhizae, which is a symbiotic connection between fungi and tree roots, and so together they create this network where they both share and help each other. And I thought these two layers were really interesting, so that you don't only have one network, but you have multiple networks, and they somehow create a symbiosis. This is mycorrhizae under a microscope, which I also found had a very interesting structure. But what I found was lacking is that idea of multiple networks connecting to each other. So here you can only see the fungi, to the best of my knowledge, at least. And I also thought it could be interesting on this side to work with GIS data of the surrounding forest and the tree loss, as well as general deforestation and the impacts, and to think about to use these two inputs to think about forest regeneration and a future structure for the site where the different functions aren't separated as sharply, and where, for example, if parts of them would become obsolete, it would be much easier to adapt. And so I ran the gun, and these are the epochs, and so you can start to see how the roads try to follow the network, the fungi network, whereas I feel like the root network was taken up by larger landscape elements. And so this is the combined image, which I also wasn't completely happy about, just because the separation is still present. So you still have a part which is mostly drilling. You have a part which seems to be mostly plantation, and parts which are more foresty. And I think I could try to either change the scale of the second input or one of the input images, or it could be interesting to use one of the two other options I presented in the beginning as second input, and to see what that could lead to. Yeah, that's it.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed this kind of this topic sort of journey into the, let's say, fringes of the urban sphere, we may call them. It's kind of incredible, no, to find out these places that may come from this topic sci-fi movie, but actually they are pretty much what our civilization functions on. I mean, that's what feeds our urban sphere. The interesting thing is also like the way you started to look at the biological references. I think there is something about the choices you have made that also match this kind of a slightly dark dystopic approach, which also I think it's really good. Like you know, in a way, it kind of works quite well with your site in terms of aesthetic and in terms of the kind of you know, kind of looking, if you want, at this sort of a darker side of what we may call the ecology of the urban sphere. And now I think the question is, but at the same, so maybe it's not surprising that you are so pessimistic about the outcomes of your images. It's kind of in line, but no, but at the same time, I don't think they are that bad. I mean, like you were kind of dismissing them a little bit. Maybe it's a question of trying to maybe shift the way you read them or your expectations on them. I mean, you mentioned several times that you wanted to, you know, this system to kind of emerge, and I'm not sure exactly what do you mean by that. In a sense, they are already merging in my mind, but obviously they are belonging to, you know, very different kind of layers of you know, this kind of global stack. And so essentially they are operating accordingly to very different logics, no? So what you are trying to do here is to imagine how these logics may be perhaps connected through this type of you know, of models, let's say, that you have used. And but I think I'm not surprised that, let's say, the algorithm eventually ends up highlighting one over the other, because obviously their grain is quite different. But maybe let's go back 1 second to the previous image that we went through very fast, so I couldn't see it that much.
This one?
No, the first gun that you ran. Exactly. So maybe you want to zoom in a little bit, and we can try to see what is actually showing inside, because obviously the resolution here is quite tricky. I mean, in a way, from far away, it looks like more of a landscape, but I think when you zoom in, it kind of feels like the edges of these let's say craters or dunes are in fact infrastructured. They are not natural, right? They
Yes.
looks like there are other kind of roads or some form of a hard edge on them, and then it looks like these edges are kind of a little bit blurred by, there is a strong directionality, which could be, you know, you could imagine as a sort of wind blown desertic situation, or maybe water patterns, I don't know. And then there are the occasional constructions you know, being more visible, no? So they look like they are half integrated, no? Like for instance, you know, this bit here, this bit here, this little bit here, there is this little bit here, no?
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, in my mind, if you are looking at some kind of a integration of these logics, this is actually providing it. You know, it's actually giving you a kind of impression of a landscape that essentially looks like fairly natural, but when you zoom in, you realize that is actually completely infrastructured. And but the infrastructure now is no longer obeying the logic of the grid, or if you want, of a sort of machine-driven kind of development, but it's very much embedded into this substratum, no? So it's responding to a different logic. So I don't know. personally, I think it's a quite successful image. Maybe you could argue that, yeah, color-wise, it's a little bit flat or monochromatic, but maybe that is also something that you could do. You could try to enhance with you know, direct intervention on the input images, no, with Photoshop or with direct intervention on the input images. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of picking up the patterns and the grains, it did a pretty good job. So yeah, I wouldn't be so dismissive about it. I think it's an interesting way of resolving this. On the other hand, I would be really intrigued to see what happened if you would apply that other image that you have shown. This is the logic of your biological model here was very much driven by this cellular organization. So obviously the whole project here, the whole vision is organized around this cellular logic. But later you showed a very beautiful image, microscopic image of like this fibrous, this mycelium model. Next, yeah, this one, I think. Okay, let me just clear this. Yeah, this one, I mean, I don't know, but I think it's quite intriguing. It has, like you said, has multiple layers. There is a layer of this network that are very crisp, and then other layers that are more gradient-like and softer, which probably will be read differently. So I think it could work quite nicely, but obviously this will create a model that is not so much cellular based, but is more, let's say, network based or, you know, infrastructure based. So it may highlight these elements of infrastructure that, you know, in the original model are like completely grid-like, whereas here may become more, let's say, distributed, as in the case of the mycelium, which is the biological reference here. So I would be quite intrigued to see this image at work, and maybe on, I don't know if you have time, maybe on both scenarios. And I think your two scenarios are very interesting. And rather than saying one or the other, I would try to create like a little matrix where you apply the same. Let's say you have two scenarios and you have two biological models, the cellular and the network. And I would try to apply both to both locations. And so you come up with, let's say, 4 results that are, that potentially then, you know, you could use to create like a single narrative, if you want, of you know, of kind of a alternative scenarios of these territories. And I think that's in itself is interesting, because I guess in your case it's not so much the individual site that matters, but is really this kind of condition that you could find in so many different parts of the world. Right. And that is like so significant of our times, but it's also very much overlooked, because, you know, obviously when we think about cities, we don't think about those kind of sites. We think about the city centers and we think about, you know, suburbia, whatever, but very few people think about you know, this condition that is so profoundly connected with urbanization, but that occurs physically in very remote places, no? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's really cool, and I think that you can. I think the algorithm seems to work pretty well. I think you can see from the epochs that is actually finding and picking up details and so on. I think for me that could be a good
Yeah, I like the idea of having a matrix with 4. I think I will continue like this.
Yeah. Also, I think that I do agree with Marco. I like the brief. It is something we've been working on also for a while. The idea of how productive landscape, form of productive landscape, are effectively part of the urban sphere or part of urbanization, and how they can be considered as more urban rather than being simply some form of infrastructure that supply global cities, so how they can become the center of new type of activity. So I think as a brief is interesting. I wanted just to make a short comment in terms of visual language. It seems to be all gray, which I think it's good, but then we should maybe push that a little bit more. In that sense, maybe rather than the image of the as Marco was suggesting, rather than the image of the mycorrhizae before, I will focus on this microscopic image. I think apart from this one, we have also other where you see the detail of the connection and etc. So because all seems to have these fuzzy shades, also your satellite image for some reason, maybe is the resolution in which these sites are captured in with the satellite or something else, but there is some sort of visual correlation. So I will try to use these microscope image that have also the same type of quality, and rather than trying to sharpen it or to add color to make it look like is a sharp satellite view of London, why it's not, to try to work more with this aesthetic and with visual language. So to frame really this sort of gray language across the overall presentation so that visually becomes more coherent. In that sense, yeah, this type of image are more appropriate also for this purpose rather than the one of the macro of the mycorrhizae where you see all the detail. I think I will work more on that.
So what are you suggesting that I edit the satellite images?
No, I would focus more on this as a training image on this type of, with the one you have on the screen now, but there are other microscope image, they have these shades of green. And it seems also the nano picture you had at the beginning has the same type of shades, and those the site have a certain sort of fuzzy quality. So I will try to focus the presentation on this type of visual language. And
Right.
I would skip other biological example like the one of the macro photo of the mycorrhiza that you showed before.
If you go back, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one.
Oh, yeah.
It looks completely different from your style of.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So I think it's better if you keep that kind of coherence, which it just becomes very much your, your style and your line of inquiry. And I think it will also give more coherent results. So in the end, I think it will look better.
Mm-hmm.
And will be also more consistent, so we can compare the results better, because this pattern is radically different from the different one, both in terms of color. Although is the mycorrhiza, but when you look at it at this scale, it's visually a quite radically different pattern. So I will focus on the microscopic image and the image of this kind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you go back 1 second to the next? We haven't seen very clear. Yeah, this one. What is the result you get from this one again?
This one, the result is the combined image is this.
Oh, I see. But this you run it with the brown kind of image, right?
Yes, with this one.
Oh, I see. It would be cool to try to run it with the other one.
With this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right, cool. Well, you could try that. Okay, cool.
Right.
Any more comment?
No, I think we're okay.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I'm excited to see what will come out.
Thank you. So, Caroline, I think yesterday we have Zeriu, but Irini was suggesting that he's still finishing training. So Caroline, if you are ready.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm ready. Sure. Hi. Can I
Hello.
share my screen? I'll go to here. Can you see my screen? Is it working? Yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, following up on what I did yesterday, I was running actually still again. So now it finished to run, and I wanted to start maybe a little bit again about like the project and the images that I took at source, and then start showing the results. I also just managed actually to reassemble them all together, the two versions. And this was actually one of the images of the project from before. And it's actually interesting because in this area, there are like new gas wells that are emerging. So this is basically the situation right now with the city growing in this area and an airport and settlements. And like the extraction wells like all around the territory and kind of between the lakes. What we cannot see both here and in the other image are actually the pipes. You see better actually the streets, but not so much the pipes, and the pipes are actually very interesting because they form this kind of network which sometimes go through the lakes or sometimes go beyond them, but they are very linear in a way. And this is actually like a planning, which is more symbolic, but would be like a new network, but also like new uses for this area, which would be like when the amount of wells actually also expand with some measures to reintroduce the CO2 that can be also captured in this region inside like of the same areas, so to say, where the gas is actually being extracted. So those points of the extraction, they become kind of nodes because it's usually being injected, the CO2 close to those areas, but not exactly in the same point. So it kind of starts dispersing again. And then there would be also other places for collection, more housing, eventually places for research and a growth of the place, of the city itself. So I decided to, I found it actually quite interesting about the mold that you have, about a slime mold, that you have these nodes and this growth, and it kind of seems to take, it kind of takes control of a landscape, but the form of this network kind of also changes due to the landscape. And this is the image that I used as a source image from Sabetha with the port area on the right side. And those were some of the epochs that I run. For example, this is fairly in the beginning, and I chose some of them that I found interesting to see how the fake A and the fake B is following more, I think, the path of the satellite image with the kind of style of the mold somehow and some changes, and the fake A is following, I think, more some characteristics of the mold and this mold network with some one I found very interesting, the 23. Yeah. Then the 29th, also what kind of infrastructures or what exactly was out of the city as well, because yeah, it's not so easy to recognize. And this kind of network of the growth also kind of merged a bit with the network of the lakes, or like the distribution of the lakes and the landscape. Or here like another node, and then the kind of buildings, another part of buildings, and more like human constructed landscape. And this is again like a similar, yeah, and this is kind of another node that formed, and this as well. Yeah, and this is also kind of interesting because of the kind of street that was formed here following this path. Exactly, yeah, this was again the source image. So this is the one of the reassembled ones, which is kind of has a similar infrastructure, but it's what I found this one is that it seems that it's kind of it makes kind of, it goes through the boundaries of the lakes, for example. So you see maybe how the mold would be growing through the lakes, but doesn't really go inside. So it's possible to recognize that, for example, or this other image, which I think it's more interesting also. But yeah, I don't know, it's not exactly possible to recognize yet the buildings or exactly what those areas have become. Yeah, I think that's it. That's where more or less like where I am, and I think I would like to run the gun again now, but make some changes probably on the scale or on the resolution to see if I could kind of control a bit better which aspects of the image are going to be appropriated by the machine, so that, I don't know, maybe the pipes could be the growth of the pipes or the growth of the streets, and that maybe like those nodes could get a bit more recognizable for the interpretation. Yeah.
Thank you. I think some of the images are very interesting, but again, as I asked to many of the other, can you clarify what is your question in terms of brief and research in this case? I think that was not 100% clear for me. What are you trying to achieve in terms of brief? What are we redesigning and why?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be very simple. I just didn't quite got it. You kind of, most of you tend to zoom in on the exercise quite quickly, so I kind of lose the overall.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it would be kind of this how the already existing landscape with the lakes in Sabetta is kind of merged with the pipes that are going like through the lakes and where the wells are located.
The types.
Yeah, pipes
Which
or
kind of
streets.
type?
Yeah. Sorry.
Type of streets. Types. Which types?
The infrastructure of the streets that that can be, like, for example, those streets, because there are also like a lot of pipes for the like.
What
yeah.
is this? Is a wastewater treatment plant? What is this on the water? Gas. What is it? Which kind of? You know, there is a sort of. There is a sort of a plant on the sea where there is the port. What is that?
This.
What is here? Yeah.
Okay, this is a liquefying. This is a liquefying plant for the gas, for the natural gas that is being extracted in this area.
Okay.
There are the pipes basically on the extraction wells. They transport the natural gas until this liquefying plant, and here's then also like a port where the gas is actually being then transported on to other places, to other countries on a global supply chain. But the pipes are not really possible to be seen in this image. That's maybe also something, like those are, I need to check again.
The will be about about the relationship between the natural landscape and the lake and the infrastructure.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Which kind of relationship? What do you envision to emerge? How is the project called? Because either you envision something and then you inquire through your technique. Otherwise, it's difficult to discover something in terms of design. I understand the problem of hybridizing. Okay, Marco, you can intervene in a second. Hybridizing the infrastructure with the natural lake, but I think it needs to be a little bit more sharper on which kind of hybridization are possible and which kind of new prototype of you want to happen. I think Marco wants to add.
Yeah, sorry, I was just jumping quickly because I'm kind of surprised that you you were more intrigued about the second image. I know that like with most of the project we have been looking at this kind of a, you know, let's say fake satellite or you know, but actually in your case I think the other image is like super powerful, because in a way it's a kind of a very sharp or clear the way in which the this let's say landscape with infrastructure has been kind of read and redescribed, which in a way I think makes this for me much more intriguing. Like in a way, like the whole area, it's about extracting gas, transforming that gas into liquid, flowing it to, you know, a certain point from where it's then shipped out, I guess, right? So it's basically the whole thing is like a gigantic system that essentially scans the whole landscape for concentration of gas underground, and then you know, extracts that and then kind of collects it or flows it into certain areas, and in doing that obviously interferes and intersects with the other layers of this landscape. I mean, obviously the natural gas is part of it, like it's part of the nature of that site, right? And then but at the same time there are other systems that are, you know, part of it, probably the water systems and so on and so forth. But you know, again, I think that's for me what this image suggests is perhaps a new way or a different way of understanding infrastructure, no? And I wonder whether that's more interesting for us than you know, than looking at the buildings or the build part, or you know, it seems to me that in this site the crucial elements is the infrastructure and the way the infrastructure is understood and operates, right? What do you think? Can we see the original satellite image again?
Yes, it is this one.
Yeah.
I found it very similar, actually, the path.
Did you stretch it or something?
I'm sorry, what?
Did you kind of stretch it or something? They sort of look different.
Maybe that was, it is probably stretched. That was probably when I reassembled them, maybe. I changed something.
Okay.
Or, yeah, I can check this again. Shouldn't be.
No, I was just wondering. It looks kind of a perspective or axonometric in some weird way. It should be square, but it still works for me. But yeah. Anyway, you were saying?
Yeah, what I don't know, I found like this, it's almost like the other way around, because the mold would have kind of appropriated this kind of already existing infrastructure here. So I think that was that's why I was more interested in this one in the beginning, at least, because it shapes almost like the already existing landscape, but in another way.
Can you zoom in a little bit more, because I
Yes.
you know, I really don't see it very well from my screen. Yeah. Yeah, so essentially like these parts, they look like the kind of built part, and a little bit strange though, a bit fuzzy, right? But then they are kind of connected by all these multiple tentacles, and the landscape is also being redescribed. Yeah, I don't know. I think the other image has more qualities for me, but maybe again, it's just a personal interpretation. Because actually this brings together features of infrastructure and landscape into one whole system that is quite different. But yeah, of course, it looks more abstract. But it could be a satellite, you know, like a kind of X-ray or false color satellite
it's a
image.
different line of exploration, but yeah, I also think that in the case of your project, this one is probably more interesting to bring forward.
Mm-hmm.
It also kind of has this really, yeah, it has a quality in itself. I wonder maybe like what you could try to do is could be interesting to use this one back into the algorithm as well. I don't know.
Oh, uh-huh.
I'm thinking whether like there is a way in which this image can become itself an input, no?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some other layers of information that you can extrapolate from your diagrams or your maps?
Some new layers. I think it could rather maybe produce other drawings, or like from this network where the wells are actually there, or maybe make some other analysis concerning like the location of the natural gas, or like the formation.
Could be interesting to use this network drawing model like over the slime mold image, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And bring in other layer of information on it, and like create a more kind of a hybrid. I don't know, I think that there is a certain quality that slime mold image brings, which now you could work with. Also, for instance, it doesn't need to look yellow like a slime mold. No, you could play with it. You could create a kind of new. You could make it look more like a satellite. Also, you could overlay it with the original terrain, or add your layer of information. I think this I mean, obviously it needs to be not deformed, like, so that it kind of matches, but I don't know, I think that there is something quite intriguing about the way you could use this to create a new vision for that area that essentially brings a new idea of infrastructure as something that is essentially biologic in nature, and actually has this ability to adapt and work with the resources that exist in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what the slime mold in a way is, in terms of being in terms of its properties, no? But in this case, you kind of use it also more materially to redescribe how these kind of infrastructures may look like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I think I will try to run the GAN again, like with this image and with a network image, and
try, but also maybe you could work with this image a little bit more, no? Get it to the right size, and
yes.
try to work with the you know, color, saturation, contrast, bring up certain element, overlay your graphics, try to bring it in. You know, I think for me it's a more interesting and promising in your case than the other one. Especially in terms of the speculative aspects of the project.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next one is Sergio.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna share my screen or a PDF. Would you be able to see this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Okay. So what I'm really interested in testing out is, again, this site in West Village, New York. And if we look at the neighborhood scale of this part of Manhattan Island, we notice it's kind of not only kind of its proximity to the water infrastructure with an interesting edge, but also the juxtaposition between the urban grid and the kind of the different scales of public park spaces that manifested either in kind of a recognizable sort of lots like this Washington Square Park, which is larger, or this is sort of a smaller Union Square Park, or some of the other kind of conditions scattered across. So the ambition is to think about if this can somehow correlate or be informed by the logic as well as the intelligence of the algae growth, as we see on the right. So here is again
sorry, can you go full screen, because basically we see I see the image like really tiny in the middle of my screen.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's better than if you can go full screen, and then you know that we don't see the whole stuff, like the presentation mode, let's say, that'll be better. Okay. Cheers.
No worries. Oh, great. I can still see you guys. Okay, that's cool. All right. So again, that's the kind of the swatch and the biological specimen I'm extrapolating from. So here we can see some of the process of the training, where the fakes are able to start to kind of correspond with the biological images. We see that some of the greeneries and park become cellularized in these kind of dots, and then they kind of become absorbed into this kind of with a defined edge boundary, but then within that there is kind of the emergence of the kind of certain strata. So here yesterday I talked about how kind of there is a kind of division here, which results in certain sort of bifurcated conditions here. And so here's another one which kind of talk about the juxtaposition or the relationship between some of the larger algae cells and some of the smaller ones, which results in kind of the texturing of this results in the kind of not only the division, but also how within each of the cells, how the inside is being sort of orchestrated. So here are some of the fakes in progress. As we can see, that I think that, for example, this column kind of clearly delineates how kind of boundary is being drawn, and the boundary itself can be thickened in a specific way. Whereas in this columns, we're able to see how within the boundaries that there can be a different sort of new sort of system that emerged that's very similar to that, but maybe it's kind of the previous generation of the one that we have already. So this is the neighborhood scale reimagined, as we see on the left and on the right. What I find really, some of the qualities that we can see on the reimagined sort of image on the right is that seems to be some sort of system of growth. So on the left, we see that kind of these greenery spaces are kind of emerging in this kind of dots. But then over time, it become kind of growed within kind of larger sort of circular cells, and within the cells, there's a different kind of texture and materiality altogether. Over time, that they start to subdivide and grow, but then what's interesting is like the kind of the relationship between them also generate a new condition, and finally that the kind of the large cell itself become a kind of a larger area, and within it there's a multiple of them happening together. So moving forward a little bit, so what I find, so I went back to kind of look at the kind of the growth as well as the developmental stages of the algae. And I think this diagram kind of clearly delineates the kind of the system that it's emerging from, let's say, a small kind of dot that start to sort of subdivide in a kind of a radially fashion, and then it kind of has its kind of internalized in these kind of circular patches, and then it become these kind of larger one with a smaller one inside. So I'm curious that how this kind of conditions is able to be applied for this neighborhood. Perhaps it's almost functioning as a series of like emergence of networks, or even phasing kind of possibilities. So thinking about kind of looking at these sequence of the images I found of how kind of it can be pointing towards a pointing towards a future where the public park spaces can be replanned or reorganized or kind of generated with this kind of logic. So that's what I have for today, since our discussion yesterday. So I'm just gonna put this image as image base for discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Look, the narrative, it's perfect. You know, I think it's really clear. I love the way you have, researched a bit more into the Volvox, and looking at this the logics of aggregation and the development of its complexity and so on. And I found it really great. It's really great the way you are kind of used it to discuss or redescribe the development of some of these new, let's call them new typologies or urban prototypes, if you want, of increased complexity. My main issue is, let's say, the quality of the image that you have produced. I think it could be much better. I think there is something in the probably in the input, or in the way this has been running, that kind of prevents it to become even the colors that you get out of it, they're not really great. So yeah, I'm wondering how because actually if you could improve that, then this work you have done of looking at different parts and then extract them to create this narrative of increasing complexity, it's really great. I mean, it could be really, really good. So yeah, I mean, maybe can you zoom in a little bit, because I can't see it very well. Like the input image on the left, it's the one you used as an input, right?
That's correct, and that's like 10,000 by 10,000 pixel.
Yeah, can you zoom in a little bit?
Let me see if I can. Where is my marquee tool?
Yeah, if you can zoom in here so we can see better, because it's I only see very little from here.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Perché non va? Maybe you should take a bit more of a close-up of the satellite, or what do you think?
Yeah. Probably also change the picture in Photoshop a little bit.
Can you move on the original satellite image?
Yeah, sure. 1 second.
Because this one, it's the resulting image. It kind of looks really strange in terms of color, and is very kind of unrealistic, which is surprising considering that the original image should be very, very crisp.
Yeah.
I mean, like, at least the colors and the nuances should be much more similar to this one. So I don't know what happened, but maybe you have an idea. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is not. This is again extrapolated from Google Map, from the map puzzle software.
But this is very good.
And then the one on this one, I quickly edited the color a little bit, so maybe that got like overly saturated.
Okay.
But again, I guess.
So this
that's
you
something
run
I can
it
work on.
for the 200 epochs in the.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. It's a kind of yeah, I don't know. Maybe you did some editing to it that made it a little strange. But the other option is maybe also to choose a slightly smaller portion of the city, maybe.
Yeah.
It's maybe the input image of the city. It's quite large, and it is possible that when you downsample it for running, you know, because I don't know what is the resolution that you run it in the gun, but I'm sure you cannot run it at 10,000 pixel.
I did 256, so that's 2,560.
Yeah, exactly. So basically that's like a 5 times, almost like 4 times smaller, right? And
yeah,
so that may be with that portion of the city, which is quite large, if you reduce it to 2,500 pixels, it may actually lose a lot of definition, right? And so maybe rather than downsampling it, what you could try to do is select a portion of that that is actually 2,500, etc., 60 pixels, so that you actually don't downsample it at all, but you just take a portion that has the right number of pixels, right? So in that way, it will retain the same resolution that we see here, but it will be a smaller part of the city. And I think it will probably, you will probably get much crispier results. And because actually what we are seeing here, it's not what the gun was seeing, because the gun was seeing like 1/4 of that resolution.
Oh, okay. Great. I'll look into it and work with the
that's
team.
what I don't know if Irini has some other ideas, but I think maybe that is one thing that I would do. And you know, obviously, if you have time, which I think you do, you could also choose you know, 2 or 3 different portions
Right.
2500 and run them differently and see what you get. Like maybe you choose one portion that is more green, like there is this part here, and there's more vegetation in it. And then you do another one with a portion that has less, for instance, and you see what you get. And you can choose the portion that contains that little park, or one that doesn't, etc. Or one that actually contains some of the water and the waterfront, and one that doesn't. And so you get you see what you get. But otherwise, I think that, so I would focus on this to try to make it really nice and crisp and realistic. Don't push the color so much. I think it's better if it's realistic. But then the narrative is perfect. So I think once you get the result, once you get a better resolution result, to do what you did of extracting different parts and then bring them into this kind of narrative of evolution, of a cellular aggregation, I think it's really, really good. So
yeah, I think I don't have many comment on this. I think I share most of the comment on Marco. The only things I would add is that I would try to quantify also in your case the result. So if we have new hybrid that emerge that bridge the built environment with the green infrastructure and the blue infrastructure that are traditionally called, or biotic and unbiotic element to emerge. Apart from commenting them typologically, I will try also to quantify them. So before there is a segregation between, water, built environment, very defined park, and now we have biotic and abiotic element, wet and less wet area. So what are the quantity that they emerge from this modified satellite map? How do we evaluate it? And later we can also evaluate which kind of effect they have on other processing in the city, like CO2 or elements that are present in the air, or biodiversity and etc. But I will start to not only comment on the prototype that comes out, but also start evaluate them in a quantitative manner, which is possible to do by evaluating the color density of the different species.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for your comments. It's really helpful.
Thanks.
Well done. Yeah, I mean, I think we're done, no? With the okay, cool. So maybe if you guys want to, I mean, if there are some questions or comments or other things that any one of you wants to discuss, or even the other colleagues and students that have been attending this session. I mean, we still have a few minutes, I think, until 1. So, if you guys want to make some comments or bring out some other curiosity and so on, we can still have a bit of a conversation. And otherwise, I think it was really positive. I mean, I'm kind of enjoying this quite a lot. I have to say, it's the work is becoming very intriguing, and also the projects, the scenarios are all very different. So I think it will make it for a really exciting, final presentation or discussion that we will have on Thursday, right? And so, I mean, I guess now you will have a more or less like 48 hours and so on for working on this. So that should give you also a bit of time to run a few more simulations. But I think I think you all seem to have a pretty clear brief, and so I guess the important thing is also that you try to rather than just running many simulation, to kind of bring together the whole discourse in a way that not only shows that you have basically achieved a good level of proficiency with the tool, but also that you are kind of engaging with the output in a way that is relevant or interesting, and that kind of fits back on the original premises of your project. Maybe even pushes it. I think most of you are working on topics that are you have been working on already in your projects for quite a while, and I think maybe one of the interesting outcomes of a short course like this would be to also challenge some of the assumptions or some of the ideas that you had on your own project in a way. So kind of use it as a sort of parenthesis to kind of reframe the discourse and what the project can bring in terms of the contemporary discourse on architecture and urban design. And I think you all have you're all touching in different ways topics that are very relevant, and sites that are also very prototypical. So these are conditions that are found in many places around the world. So these are really is a really global perspective, and I think that's also another element that would be really nice to kind of highlight and to bring together. So yeah, I think that's very good for now. I'm I hope you are enjoying as well the experiment and the sort of new perspective as well we're trying to bring. As Claudia was mentioning, this is not meant to be just basically a computer course, but it's meant to be really a kind of dive into where these techniques can bring the contemporary discourse on architecture, urban design. So we're trying to give as wide a perspective as we can, while at the same time supporting your basic, your technical abilities. And I think so far it seems to be working very well. So, yeah, if there is no other questions, maybe we just wrap it up now. And yeah, Adam?
Yeah, so sorry to sort of dwell on some of the stuff that I was asking. Is it so with generating the path or your own path, minimal path networks from the nodes on some of the analysis diagram that I did, is it then possible just to have that as like a 2D path network and then use that in the GAN sort of training to generate something?
Yeah, it is possible, as you have seen also from maybe the experiment you have done, and there is a, let's say, when the image has, let's say, many areas that are either black or completely white, that tends to create a kind of loss, because obviously there is no information there, so the algorithm doesn't know how to treat that patches. So in a way, if you create a kind of a path systems with many lines, I think what is interesting is to try to find a way to either render it or let's say Photoshop it so that it's not so black and white in a way, or that is not so let's say single line and then many areas of black, because that would tend to create a kind of areas of lack of resolution. So maybe that's why in a way the kind of gradient like background would be better. So I think you could try to create these path systems, but then I would have, for instance, the pollution gradient below, maybe with a similar color, or in a way that they kind of blend in kind of nicely. Mm-hmm. But in that way, I think you have a better chance to achieve the kind of effect that you want, because then there is that is in every pixel or every collection of pixel has a feature or an information that can be read. It can be picked up by the algorithm itself. So that's the kind of a, that's where the GAN excel is in kind of picking up macro features. So if you have many areas of pixels that are completely uniform, there is nothing to pick up, and so obviously that doesn't necessarily give you then the results that you may expect.
Okay, cool. That's good to know.
Perfect. So we'll see you all on Thursday. Irene will share with you a template so we can have all the presentation more streamlined. And
in the meantime, maybe if there are some kind of urgent needs, I think maybe you can drop a note to Irene. But otherwise, I think you pretty much know what you're doing, I think, right now. So
cool. See you all on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well done, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.